Okay, let's do this. 2020 has been a year. Between the pandemic, the election, and everything else in between, I'd understand if you wanted to write this year off as a mulligan. It's been stressful to say the least, even if things are finally starting to look up. But I don't want to erase 2020 from the history books. Not completely, at least. I remember a similar sentiment during 2016. You know, the year when everyone's favorite celebrities passed away and, an election happened. But I did get some of my favorite games ever out of that year, like Uncharted 4, Battlefield 1, Final Fantasy 15, Titanfall 2, and so many more. No matter how bad a year is, video games, well, not just video games, let me rephrase that. No matter how bad a year is, music, movies, TV, and video games seem to always be there to make the year worth existing. 2020 saw the release of some of my favorite music ever, like Poppy's I Disagree, which I thought was an amazing fusion of pop and metal. And there was the excellent Song Machine project from Gorillaz, which is up there with some of their best material, period. To be honest, I didn't see a ton of new movies or TV shows this year, but Borat 2 was just insanely good and just plain insane. And do yourself a favor and watch The Last Dance and The Queen's Gambit, even if you don't like basketball or chess. And gaming? I honestly don't know how it happened. I mean, both PlayStation and Xbox released new consoles this year despite everything going on. I still can't believe it. Well, I don't have a PS5 yet, so for all I know, they don't exist. But even the thought that an entirely new console generation launched this year is insane to me. Video games are in a pretty good spot, and I really realized that when I first saw the nominees for 2020's Game Awards. Any one of the 6 nominees for Game of the Year could have won, and I would have been happy. And that's when I knew this was a truly special year for video games. And for the record, I'm very happy with what ended up winning. And I know you're probably tired of hearing this at this point, but in a year that essentially forced everyone to be alone and wallow in despair, video games have been a great source of positivity and connectedness. And not only that, there seemed to be something for every kind of video game player this year too. No matter where you play games, be it Switch, PC, Xbox, or PlayStation, there was something great for you this year. Alright, it was kind of light for Xbox, I'll admit, but even if you only had an Xbox One this year, my point is that there was still plenty to enjoy. As kind of embarrassing as it is to admit, I didn't play a ton of new games this year. This was a year I went back and played a ton of games either in my backlog or games I just wanted to revisit. Like, I started a new playthrough of Grand Theft Auto 4 on PC for some reason. And hey, I finally beat that obscure little Final Fantasy VII game. I'd be impressed if you've heard of that one. But the new games I did play in 2020, I love. I know I'm missing some big boys like Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Demon's Souls, Spider-Man Miles Morales, Yakuza Like a Dragon, and Cyberpunk 2077. So I'm not actually going to do a top 10 this year. I just want to highlight 8 of my favorite games that came out this year. Weird number, I know, but these are 8 games I can speak confidently and passionately about, and are 8 games I think everyone should play. I didn't want to make a top 10 just for the sake of making a top 10. I wanted to highlight my absolute favorites of the year. So here they are, my top 8 favorite games of 2020. "2020 has really been the year of remakes, but more than that, 2020 has been the year of remakes that, against all odds, ended up being way better than they had any right to be. But unlike some of the other franchises that got remakes this year, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater as a series was pretty much dead and buried. After the disaster that was Pro Skater 5, I honestly believed there was a decent chance we would never see another Tony Hawk game ever again. Or if it ever did show its face again, it probably wouldn't go over too well. Sometimes, you just love to be proven wrong. Pro Skater 1+2 doesn't just feel like a remake of the original 2 games. It's essentially Pro Skater 6, or the Pro Skater 5 we should have gotten. Yes, it's all the original levels and skaters, but with some new faces, new ideas, and concepts. Fully implemented social features and multiplayer, updated gameplay. They even added in reverts and the grind meter from future games, which actually weren't even a part of the original games. It's not Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. It's Tony Hawk's Pro Skater as you remember it, and that's how you know it's an expertly done remake. Pro Skater 1+2 isn't just the 2 original games remade and then put on top of each other. The 2 games work in harmony as part of one larger picture. It's like it's a new Pro Skater game that just uses the identity and all the parks and skaters from the first 2 games as the backbone to an altogether perfected skating experience. Even just doing little hops and kickflips feel great. It's a fantastic companion to have installed just to jump into every now and then to remember how great it feels to play Pro Skater at its best. But the true joy of Tony Hawk games is when you master them, and Pro Skater 1+2 has a truly insane amount of room for improvement and mastery. The skill ceiling is the highest it has ever been, and being able to apply those skills to classic parks like the hangar and the warehouse feels great. Really, the thing I want to hammer home about this game is just how good it feels. It's one of those games you can't fully understand until you get your hands on it. When you finally sit down to play it, you really get a full understanding of just how much love and care Vicarious Visions put into this. And it's that love and care that makes Pro Skater 1+2 one of my favorite games of 2020.
Rip and tear until it is done.
id Software's 2016 reboot of Doom was a revelation for shooters. It was like a green light, a signal to developers that, hey, it's okay to make games that are arcadey as hell. In fact, it's more than okay. It's amazing. Doom Eternal takes that and amplifies it to a level never thought possible. It trades the speck of realism and immersion Doom 2016 had for an even more arcadey and old school experience. 1-ups, glowing floating weapons, keycards, and power-ups litter each and every level. Doom Eternal is a video game-ass video game, but it doesn't get hung up on its old school influences. It still takes what Doom 2016 did and expands on it, adding even more exploration and secrets to the level design, plus loads of optional content that will push even the best Doom players to their limits. It is absolutely essential to get better and better at Eternal, and the gameplay opportunities get bigger and more insane with each and every single weapon and upgrade you find. Everything adds to the combat puzzle of Doom. With every new weapon, there's a new enemy to use it on it or weakness to exploit. There were a great handful of combat encounters that I would get through, take a deep breath, and think, did that just happen? Did I really just do that? The empowerment of Doom Eternal is its greatest strength, I think. It's absolutely a more difficult experience compared to its predecessor, but I also think it's much more rewarding and satisfying too. There's so much beauty in the chaos of Doom Eternal, and learning how to control that chaos only makes the effort that went into its design that much more apparent. Plus, you have amazing additions like the shotgun grappling hook, which is just an amazing thing to say, that encourage the player to be as aggressive as possible by allowing you to literally fling yourself to the fight. And then there's dashing, ice grenades, the flamethrower, the sword. Eternal somehow makes Doom 2016 feel really slow and simple in comparison, and that's no small feat. It's honestly hard to say if I prefer Eternal to 2016 though. While I think Eternal makes some incredibly smart decisions regarding the raw gameplay, I still think I prefer the overall tone and visual style of Doom 2016. But Eternal also has so many absolutely bonkers set pieces and story moments, I almost have to give the edge to Eternal. id Software absolutely raised the bar with Eternal, and that much is clear. I have zero clue where the hell they're going to go with Doom after Eternal, and that's a testament to how great this game is. And like its predecessor, Eternal also features an absolutely killer soundtrack. Hades is probably the biggest surprise of the year for me, and for a ton of other people too. I'm not someone who typically likes roguelites, or roguelikes, whatever the hell you call them, at least not enough to typically spend money on them. But I had heard so many great things about Supergiant's latest project, I had to at least give it a shot. I'm not the world's biggest Bastion or Transistor fan, but their name is enough to pique my interest. On paper, Hades sounds almost like a nightmare. So much of the game is repeated when you die. Every time you have to go through every area and fight every boss all over again on your way to the surface of the underworld. That's the big turnoff when it comes to roguelites for me after all. I hate having to do stuff all over again. But Hades knows that. Every single playthrough, you learn and you grow. You get materials that will shake up your next playthrough, or at the very least, will let you upgrade and customize the hub world at your leisure. Every time you die, you go back to an area where you can interact with a fantastic cast of characters, some of whom Zagreus, the main character, put there to begin with. Normally, dying would be frustrating, but in Hades, I always think, well, the next run will be easier now that I have these materials, or, well, now I can build my relationship with Achilles or Artemis. Dying is almost encouraged in a weird way. It's never really a bad thing, it's a natural part of the game. And every playthrough is so unique too, thanks to all the different upgrades you get from the entire pantheon of Greek gods and all the different kinds of weapons and passive perks you get. Hades is never not exciting. There's never not something to experiment with or try. Every decision you make is a gamble, sure, but it's also something that will always separate one run from another. It doesn't matter if you're 1 or 100 hours in, every single run through Hades is unique. The design of this game is simply immaculate. Not to mention, every time you progress even slightly, Hades always adds a new layer to the experience. A new god to get boons from, a new weapon, a new set of upgrades, and even more that all dramatically change the way you play. After you've cleared it once, it's almost like you unlock Hades 2. That's how dramatically things escalate and progress. I've never seen anything like it. Hades is honestly the best roguelite I have ever played. One that made me actually cheer when I beat a boss with a sliver of health or whenever I found a super useful upgrade. I can't remember the last time I literally cheered for myself while playing a game. And if it wasn't for the next games on this list, Hades would be my game of the year. I love this game, and it absolutely deserves a place in the pantheon of all-time great games. It's an absolute masterpiece. Just play it. For God's sake, just get it in your hands and try it. My emotions have been all over the place regarding this game since I played it. I've gone from loving some of its ideas, to being bewildered by them, to hating them, to loving them all over again. I can't think of another game I've been this divided over, but at the end of the day, I love Final Fantasy VII Remake. I had the unique perspective of coming into this game without having played the original, but I did know some of the major story beats. I mean, how can you not after spending as much time on the internet as I have? Despite that though, a lot of this game was going to be a big surprise to me, so I couldn't really analyze it through the lens of it being a remake, strictly speaking. Like, there was so much in this game I didn't even realize was new to the remake, like the weird Ghosts of Fate things. But beyond the narrative changes or additions, this remake does some truly fascinating things with its interpretation of ideas presented in the original PS1 game, from specific story moments to the game's combat. It doesn't try to hide or tone down some of the original's more bizarre moments, it wears them on its sleeve. They didn't have to go as hard as they did on the Honey Bee Inn section, but they did it anyway, and the game is better for it in my opinion. I've since finished a playthrough of the original game, and I'm blown away at just how silly the remake gets at times, and it's something I deeply respect. Not only that, but Final Fantasy VII Remake also interprets the idea of old school turn-based combat in a 3D action game setting to a beautiful effect. The limit breaks, the materia system, it's truly amazing to see how a new age Square Enix has interpreted those ideas and did so with very little blowback. So much isn't necessarily changed, just expanded upon or adapted for the new era. Conceptually, the materia system is the same, but it's even more interesting than it was in 1997. While it is a shame that this is only part one of a larger project that will probably span the entire decade, it only makes me that much more excited to see what lies beyond the walls of Midgar, especially considering the game's themes regarding breaking free from the chains of fate and the vast unknown that lies in the future. It's the kind of remake that doesn't even try to replace the original. It lives beside it, and does so proudly. Ghost of Tsushima is the kind of game you can only dream of, but it's not a dream. It's real, and I played the absolute hell out of it. Ghost of Tsushima is the ultimate wish fulfillment, to simply wander the land as a roaming samurai, to engage in tense sword fights and take in the absolutely beautiful scenery you can only get in the land of the rising sun. It's magical. Ghost of Tsushima also wears its cinematic influences proudly, and beyond the obvious stuff like the awesome black and white Kurosawa mode. I mean stuff like the format changing to widescreen at the beginning of a showdown and during cutscenes, the slow, methodical pace that persists throughout the game, and the classic samurai movie themes regarding tradition and honor. But Ghost of Tsushima isn't a slave to those conventions. In fact, it actively tries to break them. I was pleasantly surprised at the story and with the progression of the main protagonist, Jin Sakai, as he goes from a duty-bound samurai to an honorless ronin, a samurai without a master who isn't afraid to resort to dirty tricks to save his people. Ghost of Tsushima is actually pretty conventional by open world standards. The world is littered by collectibles, side missions, viewpoints, and other standard open world fare, but here's the thing. I like that. I like having an open world samurai game that doesn't rock the boat too hard because at the end of the day, all I really wanted was an open world samurai game, and that's what I got. I mean this with every ounce of respect, but Ghost of Tsushima is the Assassin's Creed Japan game we never got. Ubisoft said time and time again that an Assassin's Creed game in feudal Japan just couldn't be done, and I couldn't help but feel that Sucker Punch really fed Ubisoft their own lunch here with Ghost of Tsushima. Ubisoft has also been trying over and over again to replicate the experience Breath of the Wild introduced to us too. And then Ghost of Tsushima comes along and takes away minimaps and waypoints, literally having the wind take you to your destination. It feels so good to finally have an open world game with Breath of the Wild influences that don't feel skin deep. Sucker Punch really knew what they were doing here, and it shows with this game's raw quality and polish. But at the end of the day, it just feels good to have a game where you can just be a samurai with everything that entails. Animal Crossing New Horizons isn't just the game we needed this year. It's the one we deserved. New Horizons came out just as countries around the world began to lock down to prevent the spread of COVID-19, which some did better than others, and it served as an excellent reprieve from the darkness in the world at the time. Left and right, there were headlines and news programs with updating death tolls and terrifying scenes in places like England, Italy, and New York City. But at any time and place, you can escape to your own private island. Literally. Suddenly, the world doesn't seem so scary. Suddenly, the only thing you need to concern yourself with is who joins your island, where you want to put the general store, or what color your roof should be. It's a world where you can be with groups of friends, where people held graduation ceremonies, birthday parties, and even political campaigns. It was the kind of world we needed to see again, and New Horizons is the kind of game that changes your view of the real world itself. From darkness and despair, we have simple wholesomeness and positivity that you can absorb and take into the real world. But more than its place in the world and this year, New Horizons is also just a great Animal Crossing game. The second I saw the Nintendo Switch, I knew it needed an Animal Crossing game, and it hasn't disappointed. It takes all the great stuff from New Leaf and applies it at a much larger scale, letting you truly customize your island however you want to, from adding fountains and benches to straight up terraforming the land and its rivers. Plus, the crafting system adds a great hook that adds an awesome level of exclusivity to each player's island. Some players are going to have stuff other players won't, and that's what makes their island unique and special. But it also adds a cool dynamic of trading and communication between players. Oh, you have that, I have this, let's make these for each other and then send them to each other. And while I would appreciate them adding bulk crafting, the crafting system creates such a fascinating progression and item economy that is just really special. And with every new holiday, in-game event, and update, the world of Animal Crossing just keeps getting better, and still serves and probably will serve as a necessary escape for months or even years to come.
What was that? Nothing.
Let me be perfectly clear. I believe The Last of Us Part 2 is the best game of the year. However, that does not mean it is my favorite game of the year. Regardless, The Last of Us Part 2 is probably the best runner-up I can think of since Breath of the Wild in 2017. I could talk about this game for hours and hours, but I'll try to keep it short for the sake of this video. So, why do I think The Last of Us Part 2 is the best game of the year? I'm going to start with the first thing most people will probably notice. The visuals. The visual fidelity of this game is absolutely unparalleled, and the fact that it looked and ran perfectly on my launch PS4 is a testament to Naughty Dog's mastery of the medium on a technical level, especially when you look at another high-budget game that came out this year on old hardware, Cyberpunk 2077. The animations are also on a level I've never seen before, especially when working with things in the environment like looting. But the thing that truly separates this game from anything that has ever come out is its presentation and narrative. You simply don't have conversations about other games the way you do about The Last of Us Part 2. The focus isn't just on betrayals or set pieces or whatever. It's about the symbolism, the pacing, the placement of specific scenes and moments and what they mean in the greater context of the story. It's easy to look at the story and think it's yet another story about how revenge is bad, but it's so much more than that. It's about grief, it's about processing that grief. It's about trauma, obsession, and ultimately letting go of that obsession. Many have had issues with this game's story, which is a bit of an understatement, but I think that's yet another testament to the masterful puppeteering Naughty Dog performed with this game. Every single emotional string is pulled, and the fact that this game ruffled some feathers means it was bold and brave enough to do so. Naughty Dog could have taken the safe and easy approach, but they didn't. They made the hard calls and really dragged the player through the mud, and I think the world of gaming is better for it. We need more games like this, and that's what a Game of the Year should represent. It should represent a changing tide, a standard other games should hold themselves to, and that's The Last of Us Part 2 to me. But what's my favorite Game of the Year? What gets my honors? You know, the highest honor a game can get, clearly. Well, if you caught my nod to my 2017 list earlier on, then this may not be all that surprising. If Persona 5 is my favorite JRPG of all time and something that actually broke into my top 10 games of all time list, then an updated version of that game that is bigger and better in every single way is, by default, my Game of the Year. Them's the rules. It's a bit cheap, I know, but the more I think about it, Persona 5 Royal really is my favorite Game of the Year, even without any cold, calculated objectivity in the equation. And yeah, I could just say it's literally just a better Persona 5 and end it right there, but neither of us wants that, right? It's the truth, but come on. Persona 5 Royal takes Persona 5, which was already an absolute behemoth of a video game, and adds tons of smart improvements that I never even knew I needed. And some that I did. Just about every single dungeon has been reworked or redesigned to be less frustrating and to take advantage of some new traversal opportunities available thanks to the new grappling hook. Mementos, a procedurally generated dungeon, has been completely overhauled, taking it from something that was a bit of a drag to something that is straight up fun by making it an insanely rewarding experience, and by adding a few new music tracks. It's like P Studio and Atlus looked at every single inch of Persona 5 and thought, what can we make better? And even when replaying the original game's content, the amount of thought that went into small details and moments made replaying it worth the time. But as a returning Persona 5 fan, the cherry on top of Royal is the brand new third semester. I've seen some people criticize Persona 5 for being a game without a clear message, and while I disagree with that in regards to the original game, Royal makes even that criticism irrelevant through its new character, Kasumi, and a new antagonist. I won't spoil the details of the new content or the new message, but it's something I felt was extremely poignant and important, and something I think about constantly to this day. Maybe I'll do a dissection on it later, I don't know. But the new content in Royal really touched me on a personal level, even after the original game did 3 years ago. Royal is better in every single way, and that's not an overstatement. It's like a remake you would get 10 or even 20 years after a game's release, but we got it 3 years later instead. To me, it just cements how forward-thinking P Studio and Atlus are, considering the original Persona 5 was already a pretty big revelation in turn-based JRPGs. The people who know Atlus already know this, but I'm gonna say it for the people who don't. When it comes to JRPGs, Atlus deserves the same respect as Square Enix, maybe even more. Keep an eye out for Shin Megami Tensei 5. The idea of Atlus at their best, making their first brand new JRPG from scratch since Persona 5, well, buckle up. I don't think we're ready for what's coming. But back to the Game of the Year. Because it replaces Persona 5 in pretty much every single way, it doesn't just take the #1 spot this year, it also takes a seat in my top 10 games of all time. This is one of those games where I just won't have it if you say something like, oh, I don't really like JRPGs, or, oh, it seems intimidating. I don't care. This is an all-timer, and it's only your loss if you don't do yourself a favor and play it. Well, there you have it. 2020 was a mess, but at the very least, it gave us these 8 great games and more, plus plenty that I still haven't even touched. I know this isn't exactly the definitive top 8 list considering how many games from this year I haven't played on account of the PS5's lack of availability and money, but I still feel that these are 8 really solid games that represent a variety of different genres and preferences. There's still plenty to play from 2020, so even if on a wide scale this year has been pretty terrible, I think there will still be a lot to look back fondly on in the future. And that's not even taking into consideration the games that have yet to be their best, nor the games that found new ways to stay fresh despite their age and the circumstances. It's been a strange year. And even though it was pretty great from a gaming standpoint, it can only get better from here. 2021 seems to be an extremely promising year with highly anticipated releases like Horizon Forbidden West, Resident Evil Village, Gran Turismo 7, and even, quite possibly, Elden Ring, God of War Ragnarok, Final Fantasy XVI, and the sequel to Breath of the Wild. If everything goes as planned, even though it rarely does, then the future of video games is very, very bright. But for now, that was 2020. Had some good times, but good riddance. Here's to 2021. See you there. Thanks for watching. If you liked this, feel free to subscribe, like the video, share it, and check out my other videos. If you want to keep tabs on my social media, I'm at WadeLikesPie on Twitter, and I also want to say something about my Twitch channel. I've been trying to stream a bit more on Twitch, in case that wasn't clear from all the archives I've been uploading, so check that out too. I'd love to have some more consistent viewership. I've been having a ton of fun. Anyway, with that, thanks again, and I'll see you next time.